tainted love is all we had. Our issues run so deep, now when I try to sleep I feel so bad. I should leave and by the time it's done I'll be
Run free and dive into the sky. Hear the wind crying out its prayer. Why are we so ashamed to be alive? Break the chains and our freedom's ours to take. Going harder, we are more than numbers, standing in the shade. Going louder, we are all one color, standing in the way. Don't look behind your back. Chase a light when the world is getting darker. I have a dream where love's the only side. So take my hand, join the army of the shadows. Going harder, we are more than numbers, standing in the shade. Going louder, we are all one color, standing in the way.
Sometimes we're just ourselves and not with someone else. Me, myself, and I, at least give it a try. Sometimes we're just ourselves and not with someone else. If I could save us, hell, you know I would. We're just a product of messed up, misunderstood. And just because it works don't mean that it should. 'Cause the truth is, we're better off. Me, myself, and I, at least give it a try. Sometimes we're just ourselves and not with someone else. Me, myself, and I, at least give it a try. Sometimes we're just ourselves and not with someone else. I see who you are tonight. I see who you are tonight. Maybe they don't want your love. Don't want your love. Don't want your love. You can keep your heart. I see who you are tonight. I see who you are tonight. Maybe they don't want your love. Don't want your love. Don't want your love. You can keep your heart. Me, myself, and I, at least give it a try. Sometimes we're just ourselves and not with someone else.
Music is a really important part of the show. Neo writes the music that's in the Sage catalog.
It is a lot of fun writing for a character who can say whatever the hell he wants to say. Sage don't care.
I'ma take the throne, coming for the top.
Oh, you make me wanna talk back to you. Say it like that. If I hate you, then find someone new. Baby, but you know I never will. No, so I choke you down just like a pill. Take you like a pill. Say you're sorry. Oh, maybe I'll leave. Baby, but you know I never will. No, so I choke you down just like a pill. lose ourselves in the spirit of things. We lose our sight when we put our trust in things of this material world, of things that fade away. Yet we keep coming back, 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 keep coming back. Of things we know. Spirit of things, we lose our sight when we put our trust in things of this material world, of things that fade away. Yet we keep coming back, 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 keep coming back. Of things we know.
The others don't understand what's coming.
Escape the Night, now streaming.
I close my eyes, I can almost see it. When I take a breath, you fill up my lungs. And if my mind worked backwards just for a minute, I'd hold on to you before the memory's gone. I remember you, you lift my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive. I remember you, you make me stronger. Can't go without it much longer. Remember, remember, I remember you, you lift my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive. I remember you, you make me stronger. Can't go without it much longer. Remember, remember. When I close my eyes, I can almost see it. When I take a breath, you fill up my lungs. And if my mind worked backwards just for a minute, I'd hold on to you before the memory's gone. I remember you, you lift my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive. I remember you, you make me stronger. Can't go without it much longer. Remember, remember, I remember you, you lift my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive. I remember you, you make me stronger. Can't go without it much longer. Remember, remember.
The others don't understand what's coming.
Escape the Night, now streaming.
I got trapped in your eyes the moment you looked at me. From across the room, those eyes kept following me. Something popped in my brain. Oh, baby, only you I see. Feels like I'm going insane, and only you can save me. Feels like I'm drowning in ocean's blue. Baby, come on, baby, baby, come on, let's go. I'm losing control over lights in this space. Keep jumping around, all I see is your face. But you're moving closer, no time to escape. Your hand on my shoulder shoots me into space.
J Park, Chosen One. Now available with YouTube Premium.
What's good? It's your boy D. Keep the phone you love. Well, the real phone you love, with a little help from Google Fi, a phone plan by Google.
Time is a killer, and I'm with her once again. Blind, I was blinded, and I don't see once again. Let the beat drop. The sun was in front of me the whole time. I couldn't see. Blind, I was blinded, and I don't see once again. Let the beat drop.
city preying on innocent people.
For the past couple of weeks now, I've been noticing a few odd things in my apartment. It started off with food mysteriously disappearing from my refrigerator and pantry while I'd be away at work. I didn't think much of it at the time, since every now and then I'd lose track of my daily eating habits due to my busy schedule, so I simply brushed it off. Eventually, it didn't stop there. Almost every night, I could have sworn I could hear shuffling sounds coming from within the walls. And sometimes, when I got home late from work, I'd find both my computer and TV turned on, even when I distinctly remembered turning them off before I left. Strangely, the TV would always be tuned to the local news, and my computer search history would show several results for nearby takeout restaurants. Needless to say, it was freaking me out. The building I lived in had tight security, with officers frequently patrolling the area, and it was located in the part of the city where crime was pretty scarce. Considering that I've given a couple of my friends copies of my apartment key to make sure that I wouldn't misplace them, which I so often do, I thought perhaps that one of them was trying to mess with me. I was eager to get to the bottom of this, so I asked if either of them were the culprit. However, they both blatantly denied it. This, of course, put me on edge, so I asked my landlord to check the security footage on my floor for any suspicious activity. He immediately began searching through 2 weeks of recorded footage, looking for any unfamiliar faces entering my apartment. He finished his investigation the following week and said that he's found nothing out of the ordinary. "There's nothing to worry about," he assured me. "It's probably all in your head, man." At the time, I was considering the possibility that maybe he was right. Being a domestic abuse lawyer, I've had to deal with a lot of stressful cases and work overwhelmingly long hours. Perhaps the numerous caffeine-fueled nights and constant headaches were starting to get to me. On one particular snowy day, I was coming down with a nasty cold and had to call in sick for the next few days. Despite having to reluctantly waste some of my days off on such a gloomy occasion, I was still glad to be temporarily free from my hectic obligations. It was around 7:30 and I was getting really tired. I had finally made it near my apartment on the 6th floor. I just got back from picking up some remedies at Walmart and was anticipating a nice, long night of peace and relaxation. Just as I stood in front of the door, I immediately heard a faint shuffling in the distances. My eyes scanned the hallway for any signs of life. Nothing. Suddenly, I could hear footsteps quickly creaking on a wooden surface. After listening in closely, I made a chilling realization of where these footsteps were coming from. Inside my apartment. This couldn't have been one of my friends, as I had recently changed the lock on my door due to all the strange things that have been happening. A sudden chill went up my spine, because I knew right then and there that an intruder had somehow broken in. At that moment, I felt really uneasy. I wanted to run downstairs and call for help, but I knew if I left the hallway at this point, the intruder would definitely make a break for it. Being the naive young man that I was determined to go inside, grab my gun, and try to apprehend whoever was inside. Taking in a deep breath, I slowly unlocked the door and creaked it halfway open. I was instantly hit with a powerful, ghastly odor that made me want to puke. It smelled like something had been decaying in there for quite some time. Ignoring it, I cautiously proceeded to the kitchen to grab the gun I kept hidden in the top drawer. I grabbed it and opened the lights. To my surprise, the first thing I noticed was several pizza boxes and takeout bags scattered across the ceramic tiles. This struck me as rather odd, because I knew I didn't order any takeout that day. I also noticed that there were food-covered footprints leading directly into the living room. Someone was definitely in here, and it looked like they were in a hurry to remain hidden from me. I slowly made my way to the living room with my gun at the ready. The footprints led right next to the boarded-up wall that was stationed on the other side of the room. There were a couple half of broken planks in the middle of it that I haven't gotten round to fixing yet. Very carefully, I walked towards the wall for a closer inspection. My heart was beating with every inch I took. I stopped walking around a few feet away from it and began closely examining it. I couldn't make out anything inside, so I moved my head in even closer to search for any signs of life. Again, nothing was completely visible, as it was pitch dark inside. So this time, I pulled out my phone, put it in the wall, and turned on the screen. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I saw two amber-red eyes staring directly at me. My heart dropped like a rock. I quickly stumbled backwards, trying to keep my balance. A sudden rush of adrenaline swiftly filled my entire body. I quickly spoke in the most intimidating voice I could muster up. "If you don't get the hell out from there right now, I swear I'll blow your brains out," I exclaimed. Silence subsequently followed. I was half expecting some demented lunatic to rush out from there and attack me out of nowhere, so I prepared myself for an epic battle. "Didn't you hear me? I'm not messing around." Before I could finish my sentence, I was interrupted by a faint sobbing coming from within the wall. The intruder took a deep breath and spoke in a soft tone. "But please don't hurt me. I'm really sorry about what I've done," the intruder replied. The voice sounded like it belonged to a frightened little girl around the age of 13. This really wasn't the dramatic response I was expecting. I lowered my gun as the tension in the room quickly shifted to that of confusion. "Jesus, kid, you nearly scared me half to death," I said. "Who are you? And what exactly are you doing there?" No response. It seemed like my initial reaction shook her up a bit. "It's okay. You can tell me. I promise I won't hurt you." I slowly backed away from the wall to assure her that I wasn't a threat. "See?" After a brief moment of silence, she replied once more. "My name's Maple," she said in a jittery voice. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I only wanted to get away from my mean parents." "Maple?" I paused for a minute, trying to recollect where I've heard that name before. Then it hit me. Maple was a little girl that went missing in the area several weeks ago. The media reported that she allegedly ran away from her home after her parents had physically abused her last Christmas. She must have slipped in my apartment when I forgot to lock the door that day. At that moment, I felt genuinely sympathetic, mostly because I've dealt with quite a few runaways in my line of work. The poor thing must have been scared to death. I guess when I ran out of food, she decided to break into my neighbor's apartment to help herself to their leftovers. She probably dropped all of it on the floor and made a break for it once she heard me come up to the door. I remembered at this point that there was a police car parked right outside the building. I figured that I should first try to comfort her before calling the cops over. "It's okay, sweetie. Everything's going to be okay," I assured her. "Just please, come out so I can make sure you're okay." She suddenly stopped sobbing and became quiet. Dead silence filled the room as I anxiously awaited a response. She was almost starting to freak me out. After about a minute passed, she finally said something. "Okay, but could you first put the gun on the floor and come closer? I need help getting out." Her voice sounded slightly deeper this time. The sudden shift in tension kind of threw me off at first. I wanted to comply with her demands, but I had this strange, eerie feeling deep inside that something was off. At the time, I couldn't make out what it was though. Giving in to my paranoia, I thought it was best if I just left her there while I go get help. "Oh, actually, just wait here, Maple. I'll be back soon with a—" "Wait, don't go," she interrupted in a surprisingly loud and desperate plea. The sudden outburst made my whole body flinch. "You can't leave me here. My ankle, it hurts really badly. I think I twisted it when I slipped on the floor. I don't think I can get out on my own. You have to get me out of here right now. This place is really creeping me out." I hesitated for a moment. Believe me, I wanted nothing more than to help her out, but there was something about her tone that made me feel like she wasn't completely telling the truth. My intuition's usually pretty good at judging whether or not someone was lying, so I was inclined to follow my gut feeling. "I'll only be a couple minutes. Hang in there, kiddo. I promise I won't be long." I quickly ran out of my apartment before she could say another word. After a brief elevator ride down, I sped across the hall, out of the spinning doors, and into the freezing weather. To my relief, I found a slightly chubby officer talking to his slim partner right across the street from me. I ran towards them, eager to tell them everything that went down. Before I could make it halfway there, however, I froze. My heart sank as I remembered something that will forever send a chill down my spine. I couldn't believe I didn't realize this until now. That couldn't have been the same missing girl, because last night she was found murdered a couple blocks away. Her lifeless body was discovered stuffed inside the wall of a vacant apartment. It was all over the news this morning. Struck in awe, I was left nervously wondering who the hell was hiding in my walls this entire time. I wasted no time as I rushed to the police and frantically told them everything like a nervous wreck. At first they all thought it sounded a bit sketchy, but after I persisted for a few minutes, they were finally persuaded to follow me and take a look. Without catching my breath, I ran back to my apartment with the officers following closely behind. When we made it to my living room, I showed them where the intruder was hiding. The chubby officer told me to step back, as they both drew out their guns and pointed them at the wall. "This is the police. I want you to get out of there right this instant and put your hands on the ground." The officer's demands were met with silence. "You have 5 seconds to comply, or else I'm dragging you out." Still nothing. The slim officer nodded, cueing his partner to go in. His partner pulled out a flashlight and slowly walked towards the wall with his gun still drawn out. I anxiously watched as he made his way to the wall and put his head inside. He began thoroughly searching both sides. "Did you find anything?" the slim officer asked. "Nope, it's all clear," he replied. "But I can tell someone's been hiding it." Before he could finish his sentence, he paused. He put his head in deeper for a closer inspection. "Hold up, I think I see something." Judging by the surprise in his voice, I had a feeling that he was about to discover something really disturbing. I could feel it in my bones. "What is it?" his partner called out. The chubby officer took his head out of the wall and looked at his partner with a shocked expression. I think I can see a couple of bodies inside." Those words made my entire world turn upside down. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you sure about that?" the slim officer asked. Yeah, I'm sure of it," he exclaimed. "My God, I've never seen anything like this in my entire life. These bodies, they look so mutilated. Just what the hell happened in here?" The unsettling thought that I had just stood feet away from human corpses made my stomach turn. The powerful stench of decaying flesh made me want to puke my guts out. I knew right then and there that whoever had been hiding in my walls this whole time was definitely not a little girl. "Help me break this wall down. One of them could still be alive." The slim officer put his gun in his holster and walked towards the wall. I watched from about 15 feet away as they both started breaking down the old planks one by one. They quickly tore off 3 rows of them with ease, while blood started pouring out in excessive amounts. Suddenly, out of nowhere, several lifeless bodies, dismembered bodies, fell right off the wall and onto the floor. My eyes grew wide with shock. Most of their flesh looked like it was violently bitten off, and their mutilated faces were completely unrecognizable. The disturbing thought of the immense pain these victims must have suffered through was simply too much to take in. Upon taking a closer look at the type of clothes they had on, I made a chilling realization of who they were. They were all food deliverers from several nearby restaurants. I could barely make out the restaurant logos and their violently shredded and blood-soaked shirts. I wanted to look away from the gruesome sight, but there was something above the bodies that had caught my eye. It looked like there was something written in blood on the inside of the wall. At first, I couldn't make out what it said through the darkness of the room, so I slowly walked closer to read it more clearly. My entire body shook to its very core the instant I realized what it said. "You're lucky you didn't do what I asked." The legend goes that if you sit upon the throne of the little people, you will die in 7 years. Well, almost exactly 7 years ago, 3 friends and I did just that. 2 of them died yesterday in separate incidents across the country. Back then, we were college buddies and ghost hunters. Abandoned asylums filled with asbestos, Civil War era graveyards, and haunted railroad tracks. Nothing scared us. Only one thing ever did, and that was the village of the little people. It's in Middlebury, Connecticut, not far from a restaurant called Maggie McFly's. The first semester of our senior year was ending, and on the way back from a road trip to New York, we decided to go for a ghost hunt. A website called Damned Connecticut revealed the GPS coordinates of the Little People's Village, just a 20-minute detour from our route home. It was the last thing the 4 of us would ever do together. The village is in the middle of a forest. You may miss it because it's quite small. Dull-sized houses fill a clearing in the woods. Little pathways connect the houses to each other, and then all the pathways lead to a single point: the throne. Unlike the houses, the throne is human-sized. We read about the legend on the website. Sit upon the throne and you will die in 7 years. And one after another, we all sat upon the throne, taking pictures and joking. Since we now had 7 years to live, we might as well make the most of it. I was the 3rd to sit, and the first 2 who did are dead. What scared us that day happened on the way out. As we were leaving the forest, it was a foggy night, and we all carried flashlights. As we walked, little footsteps pattered on the ground several yards behind us. Someone or something was following us. With our flashlights, we turned around and scanned the area, and then we all saw something none of us could explain. In the distance, several pairs of eyes glowed in the darkness, as if it belonged to creatures the size of a doll. And when we shone our flashlights upon them, the creatures scampered away, their footsteps pitter-pattering. Laughter, like that of children, echoed through the woods. We ran back down to the car and drove away. One of my friends claimed she got a good look, that she clearly saw a little person. I still remember Hannah's words. It had the body of a baby doll, except its hands were just fingerless stumps. All I could see of its face were round, glowing eyes. The ride home was awkward. Our other 2 friends reasoned the eyes belonged to forest animals, but I could tell they were shaken up, and I didn't know what to believe. Hannah didn't back down, insisting that she saw a little person, and I did my best to support her without taking sides. I think Hannah felt bad that we didn't believe her, because she stopped hanging out with us after that. It was nice to have a girl in our little group, especially one as cool as her, though after graduation, we all drifted apart anyway. One friend became an engineer, the other a doctor. Hannah, I have no idea what happened to her. She seemed to drop off the earth. And myself, I never amounted to much. Despite, or maybe because of, majoring in astronomy, I work at Starbucks. I always dreamed of becoming the next Neil deGrasse Tyson, or maybe just starting an astronomy YouTube channel. But aside from owning a few telescopes, I don't do much with my passion. If I live past this day, I promise to make something of my life. If I live. At 6 p.m. yesterday, I got a call that my doctor friend was murdered while out for a morning jog. He lived in Washington State. Then, at 9 p.m., I was informed that my engineer friend was killed while he walked home from work. He lived in Atlanta. Shocked at this turn of events, I checked the local news in each area to find out more. The description of their deaths was eerily similar. Both were found with their hands amputated and their blood drained. What are the chances? About an hour later, Hannah knocked on my door. Her auburn hair was shorter now, but her smile was just how I remembered. Most striking, she was gym fit and 25 pounds lighter when I knew her. Back then, she was the cool girl that would hang out with the guys, but never the girl we wanted. To be honest, though I never admitted it, I always felt a sense of comfort and warmth when I was with her. We sat on the couch of my little apartment and exchanged pleasantries. "Have you heard?" she asked. "It's really sad and so sudden," I said. "I haven't had time to process it." "It's the curse. The little people are coming for us." I didn't know what to say. "Let me make you a coffee." So I used my most proficient skill and made us coffee. "I drove 4 hours to come see you," and I sipped the steaming mocha. "I was so worried that they got you too." "You could have called." "I came because we have to go back, together." "To the little people's village? If we're cursed, wouldn't going to their home make it easier for them to kill us?" "You don't know the whole story." Hannah explained. After witnessing a little person, she did a lot of research, even returning to Middlebury to speak with the locals. That land was once owned by a doll maker. The doll maker was known for creating the most lifelike dolls, and no one could figure out how he made his dolls with such a realistic appearance. It was rumored that he prayed to an ancient pagan god to infuse his dolls with the souls of the damned, which gave them their realism. The doll maker was a perfectionist. For each doll he completed, dozens were discarded for the most minor imperfections. But unlike most doll makers, he didn't just throw the dolls away. He would cut their hands off to keep them as memento of what he had created, and bury the bodies in the forest. One day, the doll maker began to hear voices. The voices told him to build a little village, and so he did. The voices also told him to build a throne for their king. "But what exactly makes the throne cursed?" I asked. Hannah had finished the coffee and looked wired. Her eyes were bloodshot, probably from lack of sleep. "The dollmaker mistakenly thought he was the king and sat upon the throne. 7 years later, he cut off the hands of his wife and daughter, drained their blood, and then slit his own throat. I even have a newspaper clipping from that event almost a century ago." "Okay, so we committed the same sin as the dollmaker, and now we're cursed?" I said. "What do we do about it?" "I don't know, but we can't just wait for them to get us. That's why we have to go back and beg their forgiveness." Hannah jiggled her car keys. "You have a better plan?" Truth be told, I didn't need a reason to road trip with Hannah. During the 2-hour drive to Middlebury, we reminisced about our college days, and even joked that we could have been a couple. We talked about how funny it would have been if we were secretly dating, and none of our friends knew it. As she suggested, we could sneak a kiss when their backs were turned, or as I suggested, have a quickie behind a tree while out on one of our ghost hunts. It felt good to joke around with Hannah, despite the circumstances. Once we parked in the off-road near the forest, I felt a sudden, crippling rush of fear. As if the road trip with Hannah had been a warm dream, and I'd just awoken to the cold reality of what we were about to do. I couldn't even open the car door. My heart was pounding against my chest, and I could barely let out a breath before I had to take one in. "Let's go back," I said. "Please, let's just go home." Hannah put her arms around me. "You were the third to sit on the throne. That means you'll die before I do." She hugged me. The tears wet my cheeks. "I can't let that happen." We held hands as we walked through the forest, our flashlights illuminating the way. It was a foggy night, like the one 7 years ago, but far colder. And as we approached the village, it felt like with every step, the temperature dropped. The terror of what awaited us chilled my blood. Hannah was my strength. In her beautiful hazel eyes, there was no fear, only determination to do what must be done to save both our lives. Little eyes glowed in the dark ahead of us. I wanted to run, but Hannah tightened a grip on my hand and pulled my frozen body forward. We shined our flashlights on the eyes, and they disappeared. Only the little houses remained to be seen. And there was the throne. It towered over and faced the little houses. The throne seat was a broken mess of stone, and the back of the throne was a ruddy rectangle slab. A withered tree hung over it, its dead branches scraping the stone. Hannah dropped to her knees and bowed before the throne. "Hannah, what the hell are you doing?" She bobbed up and down and chanted something in a language I didn't understand. It sounded like backwards Latin. "Whatever you're doing, it's not funny." She kept chanting backwards Latin and bobbing her body. Something was very wrong. I turned to run. A sharp pain flared in my shin and I fell. My flashlight flew out of my hand. A little person with a knife protruding out of its stumpy hand, as if it was a finger, had stabbed me. Its body looked like a baby doll, but there was something odd about its face. Parts of it looked plastic, while the other parts were a patchwork of stapled-on human skin. It stabbed my leg again, while laughing like a child. Pangs of pain pulsed through my body. "Help!" Little eyes appeared all around me. There was someone sitting on the throne. It was too dark to see anything but his aura. Hannah was talking to him in that backwards Latin. He spoke in a hushed but deep voice that burned my ears. "Hannah!" She wouldn't even look at me. "We have to get out of here!" The man on the throne rose and walked towards me. He had no hands, only stumps. The flesh on his face barely had skin. Where his nose should have been, there were 2 holes. Around his neck hung 4 human hands, as if they were his ornaments. And he wore a crown on his head, made of glitter and gold. Then I saw Hannah. She wasn't 25 pounds lighter. She was a skeleton. Her pale skin on her face clung tightly to her cheekbones. Her ribs were so clear they almost poked out of her chest. And on her head was a gleaming silver crown. The next thing I remember was waking up in my bed. My work alarm had just gone off. My leg hurt like hell, but it had been bandaged and I could walk just fine. There was a letter on my bedside table. "Being with you made me so happy. I will treasure our time together forever, because where I'm going, there will be no more happy moments. The king has forgiven you. Never return and never come looking for me. Live for the both of us. Love, Hannah." I went online and researched everything I could about the Little People's Village. Aside from Damned Connecticut and a few other websites, There was nothing substantive. Judging by Hannah's letter, the less I knew about the little people and their king, the better. All I really knew was that a curse had killed my friends, and I was supposed to be next. But then Hannah saved me. I owe it to her to live my life to the fullest, the life she gave me. I picked up one of my telescopes and wiped off the dust. One of these days, I'm definitely going to set this baby up and do some stargazing. Maybe I'll even upload a video of what I find to YouTube. But that had to wait. I put the telescope down and picked up Hannah's letter. I read the first paragraph again. Being with you made me so happy. I will treasure our time together forever, because where I'm going, there will be no more happy moments. I realized I couldn't let things end this way. Despite a warning, I'm going back to Middlebury to find her, to the little people's village, to the throne, because I know one thing for sure. I love her. After I sat on the throne, I had 7 years to live, yet in those 7 years, I barely lived. Even if I have to face the king, I will save Hannah and let her know how I feel. I won't waste my life anymore. I won't be afraid. From now on, I'll live every day like it's my last. Because today, it just might be. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation, so that our vessel was made legitimate prize. Whilst we of her crew were treated with all fairness and consideration due to us as naval prisoners, so liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath a scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I begun to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened while I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When I last awoke, it was to discover myself half stuck into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less desirable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime, yet the very completeness of the stillness and homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions which, for innumerable millions of years, had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me, that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odour of the fish was maddening, but I was too concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening, I attained the basic of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I do not know why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastical gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon, I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy indeed. I now felt quite able to perform the ascent, which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the broken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of lost paradise and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashionable realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analysis, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me. An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphs unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did the most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of Dore. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shrewn, disporting like fishes in waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or Bulwer, they were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shrewn in an act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of most daring anthropologists, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then I suddenly saw it. With only a plane churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Vast, Polyphemus-like, and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm some time after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated anthologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not have all been a pure phantasm, a mere freak or fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself. Whatever does there come before me, a hideous, vivid vision in reply? I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless thing that may, at this very moment, be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand, the window, the window! I want to say my house was untidy because of my busy lifestyle. But the truth is that there was plenty of time I had to clean up. I was just lazy. I hated going out in the cold, so I let bags of rubbish pile up against the back door. I hated the feeling of cold, murky water, so I left washing up until the last possible moment. And I hated the sound of the washing machine, so I'd do my load when it came to a time when I needed something. Honestly, it was never that bad to me, until I first saw some bugs. They were fast, but when I caught sight of them, they were just like your ordinary garden variety of insect. When one wasn't fast enough, and I was, I gave it a hard press until it was a stain. I would have called an exterminator, but the idea of someone coming over would mean that I'd have to tidy first, so in my head, that was the first job. After a while, I started to develop a small stomachache. Nothing I couldn't handle, but it was a wake-up call to actually get off my ass when home and actually start sorting things. The biggest wake-up call, though, was a few days later. I had made lunch, which I did from time to time, since it's a great way to save money. An idea that was implanted in my head when I thought about the dreaded exterminator fees I'd be paying soon. I took a bite out of my ham and mayo sandwich and had already swallowed it when I noticed the twitching remains of one of the bugs. I immediately felt sick and wanted to spit out what I ate, but by then it was too late. I threw away the rest of my food, knowing that I needed to sort things as soon as possible. When I got home that day, I saw one of the bugs. I quickly scooped it up and examined it. I wanted to get a good description of it for the exterminator, since saying they're small, black, and have 6 legs isn't really very specific. I held it up to my eye, watching it wriggle between my finger and thumb, detailing it in my head. It was an odd-looking thing, to say the least. It had just standard 6 legs. It looked black from a distance, but up close, it was more a translucent dark brown. It took a while to notice, but its head almost seemed inflated, no doubt with whatever sugar water or drink they'd scrounged from my kitchen. The only other thing that stuck out to me before I stopped looking were the spines of the legs. However, at this point, something strange happened. First, my focus came and went. I struggled to grasp a solid image of the bug without it soon becoming too blurry to see. My breath shortened, my body now relying on staggering gasps. Something in my brain felt like it shorted, and my mouth instinctively opened. My last bit of control was me trying to stay upright and close my mouth. In my head, I questioned if I was having a stroke. Nevertheless, as soon as my mind lost focus of my body and onto that question, another reflex took over and shoved the bug into my mouth. I tried to force every portion of my body to spit it out, but everything I did turned into chewing. The feeling of the prickly, broken up carapace rubbing around in my mouth made me feel queasy all over. My effort to push it out with my tongue turned into swallowing. As soon as I felt like the bug hit my stomach, everything got worse. I fell on all fours, my dizzying vision barely making out the small black dots circling my hand. One by one, I picked and ate each bug I could get my fingers on. Even though my body was slow, they were seemingly easier to catch, almost like they wanted to be eaten. Eventually, I was scraping the sides of my palms to scoop up groups at a time, with no regard to dust, and swallowing them down with minimal chewing. I felt sick, but my gag reflex was non-existent at this point, no matter how much I wanted to reject them. My last memory was standing up and stumbling away. The next day, I awoke slumped on my bed, my feet hanging off the sides. It seemed I walked there and slept where I fell. As soon as I moved, pain erupted in my stomach. Damn bugs. It was the same spot as before. However, it was many times worse. I got up, and while curled over, I tried to get ready for the day. But it was soon apparent that this would not happen, and I called in sick. I stumbled my way to my chair, ready to Netflix the day away as I waited for the pain to go away. I skimmed over the selections I recommended and put on an old 90s sitcom to calm my mood. I would have tried to assess what happened the night before, but that would have meant remembering the disgusting act I did, and that was something I didn't want to repeat in my head. Eating was not an option. I didn't eat the whole day since the pain would not subside. Eventually, I started to get tired, my body not seeming to have rested well the night before. I rested my head on the armrest as I lay down, and just before I was about to settle, in front of my eyes, I saw movement. A bug. Just as I thought about rushing up to get away from it, my body froze. The bug looked around, and after having sensed me, it stopped its random scuttling and faced me. Try as I might, I could not get my body to move. I tried screaming out, but it just came out as a meek groan. But with that, my mouth opened, and the bug took this as an invitation to enter. I felt it crawl into my mouth, its feet poking away a line along my cheek and down my throat. It forced its way through until it ended deep inside me. Tears were rolling down my eyes from the feeling of helplessness, the feeling of invasion filling my mind. I got up, first thinking I had gained control, but then I fell on all fours to the ground. And it began again. Bugs surrounded me as I gorged on them, the brittle morsels getting stuck in my teeth as I swallowed clumps at a time, the gooey mess leaving an alien feeling layer on my tongue. All my senses numbed as I sped up. The pain I was feeling was gone, which just gave my body no reason to slow down. Eventually, I did slow down, my feeling returning as a tingling feeling on my skin. And then I stopped, my body crashing down to the ground as I suddenly regained all control. I got up, tears still smeared around my face as I spat out as much as I could. But I inevitably knew what was done was done. I hastily packed a small case and got out of my house as fast as I could. In a bid of respite, I booked the nearest hotel I could find. Soon, I was laying down on freshly laid sheets in an uncluttered room, the only things out of place being myself and my dusty old bag. My mind was feeling refreshed. Is this what it's like to live in a clean place? I thought to myself. Something I hadn't experienced in a long time. As I lay there, taking in the new, fresh surroundings, I eventually had to think about what I needed to do. The first thing I thought was an exterminator. That was a must, as I was now terrified of seeing even a single bug. A new priority I thought of was a cleaner. Being in a clean space made my headspace feel clean. I remember my mother always telling me something like that, but I always just took it as her trying to trick me into cleaning my room. The third priority was seeing the doctors. The pain in my stomach had returned, and it came with a vengeance. It felt like I'd swallowed 1,000 razor blades while bouncing eternally on a trampoline, which might not have been too far from the truth. I was exhausted from the day though, and had resolved that I'd do all this the morning after. Getting up, all I wanted to do was go to the bathroom, brush my teeth, do my business, and go to bed. I unzipped my bag, which was stuffed with unfolded clothes. I rummaged around and pulled out my toiletry bag, which held a new toothbrush and other fresh bathroom supplies. Ready to get my scrub on, I unzipped it, and my body froze. From within, dozens of bugs scurried out. They ran over my hand, along my clothes, and all over the bed. I couldn't move. I was again a prisoner in my mind, helplessly watching, wishing the worst wouldn't happen. But it did. My hand turned, my palm now facing up. A cluster of bugs stayed in my palm, running small circles, making sure not to fall off. My hand raised up to my face, now eye level. The water in my eyes were not enough to block the view. Before I could brace myself, I palmed the entire contents into my mouth, and it began all over again. The bed providing a feasting ground in which my uncontrolled body took full advantage of. I had managed to blank most of it out, but not enough. I remember waking up the day after and immediately reaching for my phone. With the pain I was in, I should have really prioritized the doctors, but the events from the previous night made me want to end all the bugs as soon as I could. Between groans of pain, I managed to get a rush job booked within the same day. From the description I gave them, he said it'd be done by the evening. It cost a bomb, but in my head, it was worth it. I also got on the phone to a cleaning company to thoroughly sort my house. If mess brought them in, then I would do anything to prevent this from ever happening again. Again, it cost a lot to have them work on such short notice, but the value was justified. I lay there the entire day in complete agony, but felt smug with the satisfaction that this would soon be over. Other than the cleaner visiting me at the hotel to pick up the spare keys, I was left to curl up and rest. The day after, I received 2 calls, both saying they had done their jobs. I checked out of the hotel, another big expense since it wasn't pre-booked, but at this point, I didn't care. I slowly made my way home, having to take many breaks to just lean against the wall for support. My car was still at home, so I needed to get there before I could drive to the hospital. As soon as I entered the front door, everything was alien to me. The tables were spotless. I could see the floor. The shelves were perfectly stacked, and everything smelled like citrus. I took one step in just fine. My second step didn't go as well. My leg caved under me, and I was on the floor. That was all I remembered before blacking out. I woke up to the sound of beeping. My eyes focused on the sterile look of the room. I recognized that I was in the hospital. A nurse noticed me and contacted the doctor who was treating me. everything felt like a blur as I tried piecing things together. Soon enough, the doctor came in, and with him, he brought some answers. He started with a cliche good news and bad news. The bad news was that they had found some growth in my stomach. However, something was keeping it benign, and it was at a stage where it was still treatable. I looked at the new scar on my stomach and got the answer if it was still there. I asked how I got to the hospital, and the doctor said I was found by the cleaner. Apparently, they came by to drop off the spare keys since I wasn't at the hotel. When they got to my house, they found the front door open and found me lying on the floor unconscious, with bugs crawling in and around my mouth. I was in shock. I wanted to ask so many questions, but at the same time was at a loss for words. I pondered about what he meant about the thing which kept the infection benign. When I asked, the doctor had no answer. I vaguely brought up the bugs, asking if anything like that could be the factor. But it just seemed to confuse him, so I changed the subject. My time there just blurred by, and before long, I was back home. A scar to prove to myself that I hadn't just been dreaming this whole time. I stepped into my now hollow-looking house. I looked around, and everything was still. Not a bug in sight. I tried looking for them between the spaces under the fridge and other likely hiding spots. Nothing. I don't know if it was the bugs that helped me, but I thanked them anyway, just in case. I can't stand beef. Can't eat it. Can't even look at it at times. It's not some kind of moral stand, and I'm not religious. It's just the memories and history I have with it. I just can't. It's too much. Every year, my dad used to hold a Thanksgiving barbecue. He'd grill up some burgers, some kebabs, maybe some sweet corn, and we'd have a feast. The last Thanksgiving barbecue we ever had was when I was 16. The last time I saw my dad breathing was 3 weeks after that. That year, he decided he wanted to try fresh beef mince. No one had noticed the meat was oddly moist and squishy, and off pink that wasn't quite right. We hadn't realized that there were worms in it until my dad had already cooked it. There's one thing you have to understand about my dad. I loved him to death, but he could be a bit of a stubborn idiot, to the point of risking his life, jackass style. He'd grilled the patties, toasted the buns, made a special sauce. He was going to eat his goddamn burger, worms or no worms. We all cringed and laughed as he devoured it in just a few bites, the sloppy pink juices running thick down his chin. In hindsight, we should have stopped him. In a way, we were all complicit in his death. Nothing happened for 2 days, but on the Sunday after Thanksgiving, during the church service, he crapped himself on the pews. I know, it sounds funny and all, but it was horrifying. He was all pale and streaked with blood, and when I looked real close, I could see small chunks of rancid flesh, swarmed with the tiny pink bodies of worms. They wriggled around, tiny holes opening in front of their bulbous, soft heads to reveal rows of tiny teeth. I vomited. He was bedridden after that. It seemed he wouldn't stop defecating, each time getting bloodier and bloodier. The bodies of hundreds, no, thousands of worms contorting in the toilet bowl. There were moments of lucidity when he'd hold my hand and ask me to get help, but he spent most of the day feverish, sick. The doctor couldn't visit until the next business day. The whole night I sat next to him, watching as he moaned and sobbed, his face racked with pain. My hand was damp with his sweat, spit and tears by the next morning, when the doctor finally came. Mom was having a breakdown in her bedroom as the doctor explained to me that he had no idea what this was or how to treat it. Dad would have to go to the hospital. I gasped with relief at this. I couldn't bear the thought of him wasting away at home. But then my dad raised a shaking hand. No hospital. I want to be at home, he moaned weakly. The doctor looked at me sadly, his eyes filled with some faint regret. Then there's nothing I can do, son. I'll visit you when I have some answers, okay? Tell your ma to call me with any questions. And just like that, the bugger was gone, and Dad was still dying, and Mom was losing her mind in the back of the house. And oh God, what was I going to do? For 2 weeks, I cleaned him and fed him and held his hand while he groaned in pain. For 2 weeks, I had to listen to his moans and screams while I laid in bed, the sound piercing my thoughts and my dreams. On the third Thursday after Thanksgiving, the worms appeared on his chest. They were fat, little bumps in his skin, flexing and writhing, stretching his skin taut with a million tiny pink flecks. And as they dug their way up towards his face, they left thick, bloody trails in the raw, exposed flesh, tunnels carved into his body. He woke less and less these days, but when he did, he felt every detail of their mincing jaws. Richard, what is that on my chest? It feels so weird. Nothing, Dad. It's nothing. Just don't worry about it. You'll be fine. The doctor's coming soon. Love. He drifted back into blissful sleep, unaware that he was being eaten alive. But I couldn't lie to myself. I'd seen them crawl through him, the thin film on his skin warping to fit around their swollen bodies. The next day, they doubled in size. I couldn't do it. I couldn't watch these finger-sized monsters eat my dad alive. Already his chest was swollen and purple, bursting to full with blood and loose meat. And now they were crawling up to his neck, into his face, where they'd chew on his cheek and gnaw on his eyeball until it popped like some sick blister. I had to stop them. I had to cut them out. I had to save Dad. I grabbed an X-Acto knife from my room, tracing it delicately around one of the protrusions in his neck. I started to uncover a wriggling, flesh-pink mass. There wasn't one worm in the lump. There was hundreds, the tiny bodies spilling from the slit in his neck, dribbling onto the floor, onto my arm, slimy and slippery and tinged crimson with Dad's blood. I desperately scraped them off my arm, scrubbing and shrieking. Soon, more than just worms were dripping from the gaping hole. Blood. It started to drip faster and faster until it was pouring onto the floor. A crimson torrent carrying with it hundreds of the tiny things. I scrambled back, away from my dad's body, and suddenly my head swelled with the pain and shock, and everything went black. They found me, comatose, next to his corpse, his throat slit, a bloody knife in my hand. There really wasn't a case to make, just a news story. Local boy kills sick father. We managed to argue ethical reasons, pretended it was euthanasia. I only got a reduced manslaughter sentence. I still lost the rest of my teenage years, and a decent chunk of my adult life in prison though. I'm out now, but that event stuck with me ever since. To this day, I can't look at a piece of beef and not imagine worms writhing in the raw flesh. Sometime during the night of August 16th, 1952, the small town of Ashley, Kansas, ceased to exist. At 3:28 a.m. on August 17th, 1952, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake was measured by the United States Geological Survey. The earthquake itself was felt throughout the state and most of the Midwest. The epicenter was determined to be directly under Ashley, Kansas. When state law enforcement arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning fissure in the earth measuring 1,000 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. The depth of the fissure was never determined. After 12 days, the statewide and local search for the missing 679 residents of Ashley, Kansas was called off by the Kansas state government at 9:15 p.m. on the night of August 29, 1952. All 679 residents were assumed to be dead. At 2:27 a.m. on August 30, 1952, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake was measured by the United States Geological Survey. The epicenter was situated under what used to be the location of Ashley, Kansas. When law enforcement investigated at 5:32 a.m., they reported that the fissure in the earth had closed. In the 8 days leading up to the disappearance of the town and its 679 residents, bizarre and unexplainable events were reported by dozens of residents in Ashley, Kansas, and law enforcement from the surrounding area. On the evening of August 8, 1952, at 7:13 p.m., a resident by the name of Gabriel Jonathan reported a strange sight in the sky above Ashley. The town itself, having no official branch of law enforcement, called into the police station of the neighboring town of Hayes. Gabriel reported what appeared to be a small black opening in the sky. Within the next 15 minutes, the Hayes police station became overwhelmed with dozens of phone calls, all reporting the same phenomenon. The phenomenon was never reported by any neighboring communities. A decision was made to send off a trooper to Ashley to investigate the matter the following morning. At 7:54 a.m. on the morning of August 9, 1952, Hayes police officer Alan Mace radioed the Hayes police station. He reported that, despite following the one-way road leading to Ashley, he had become lost. According to his report, the road, quote, continued along its normal path, but somehow ended up back in Hayes. Officer Mace went on to add that the road never curved or bent in any direction. At 9:15 a.m., 7 of the town's 10 police cars were sent to investigate the situation, and all members of the team came to the same conclusion. the only road leading to Ashley stopped leading into Ashley, but instead led back to Hayes. Phone calls continued to pour into the Hayes police station, all reporting that the black opening in the sky continued to grow in size. All callers were advised to remain inside and to not travel outside unless absolutely necessary. At 8:17 p.m., Mrs. Elaine Cantor reported her neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Milton, and their 2 children, Jeffrey and Brooke, missing. According to Mrs. Cantor's phone call, the Miltons attempted to leave town in their family car earlier in the evening. They never returned. Law enforcement officials from Hayes never reported the car or individuals coming up the one-way road. At 7:38 a.m. on the morning of August 10th, 1952, phone calls from Ashley into the Hayes police station reported that the town was in total darkness. The sun had never risen. At 10:15 a.m., at the request of Hayes law enforcement, a helicopter from Topeka, Kansas, flew over the region in which Ashley, Kansas stood. The town was never observed from the air. At 12:43 p.m. on the afternoon of August 11th, 1952, Miss Phoebe Danielski called into the Hayes police station. She reported that her daughter, Erica, had begun to have conversations with her father, who died 3 years prior in a drunk driving accident. To add to her concern, Miss Danielski reported that Erica was attempting to go outside into the dark to, quote, join them. Over the course of the next 12 hours, a reported 329 phone calls were placed into the Hayes police station, all describing similar phenomenon with the children in the town. The following morning of August 12, 1952, the situation became dire. During the middle of the night, all 217 children in the town of Ashley, Kansas disappeared. A reported 421 phone calls were placed into the Hayes Police Department. Unable to be of any useful assistance, Hayes law enforcement instructed all callers to remain inside and to avoid any and all attempts at finding the missing children. At 5:19 p.m. on the evening of August 13th, 1952, Ashley Elderman Scott Luntz reported a growing, distant fire to the south. According to his description, the fire seemed to turn the distant black into, quote, bright red and orange that seemed to extend high into the sky. Throughout the rest of the day, calls continued in, stating that the fire, in addition to moving north, now seemed to, quote, come out of the black sky. No fire was ever witnessed by any of the neighboring communities or law enforcement officials. The reports continued until 12:09 a.m. on the morning of August 14th, 1952. The last phone call, placed by a Mr. Benjamin Endicott, reported that the fire in the sky had grown so intense that it began to appear as daytime over the town. The phone call ended abruptly. Here's a transcript from the phone call placed by Benjamin Sherman Endicott. Benjamin. Just hold on, wait. Continued silence. Yeah, I see something. It's to the south. It looks like... End phone call. The next phone call wouldn't be placed until the following evening. The following is the entire transcript of the final phone call to be received by the Hayes Police Department out of the town of Ashley, Kansas. It was placed at 9:46 p.m. on the evening of August 15th, 1952. In this recorded phone call, the officer on duty is Officer Pete Welsh. The caller has been identified as Miss April Foster. Begin phone call. Officer Welsh. Hayes Police Department. Muffled static. Hello? Foster. Yes, hello? Officer Welsh. Ma'am, Who am I speaking with? Foster. My name is April. April Foster. Please, sir, please help me. Officer Welsh. What is happening, ma'am? Foster. Last night they came back. Officer Welsh. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to... Foster. Last night they came back. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down and speak clearly. What happened? Who came back? Sobbing. Everyone. Everyone? They all came in the fire. What do you mean, everyone? My son. I saw my son last night. He was walking. He walked down the street. He was burned. Jesus Christ, he was burned. Ma'am, he died last year. I raised him since he was a baby. It was just me and him. I told him to watch out for cars when he rode his bike, but he never wanted to listen. Ma'am, what you're saying isn't making any sense. You said everyone came back? Are you listening to me? Everyone! Everyone came back. Everyone who died or went missing, they're back. And they're looking for us. He said, Mommy, I'm okay now. See, I can walk again. Where are you, Mommy? I want to see you. Ma'am, where are you now? Are you safe? I'm hiding, just like everyone else. We saw them coming through the fields and some people opened their doors for them. God, the screaming. I don't know what happened to them, but their houses caught fire and they caved in. I have my curtains drawn. I'm hiding in the closet right now and... Ma'am, is everything all right? Are you okay? Silence. Ma'am? Glass breaking. Oh God. Oh my God. Ma'am? Something just came in. Ma'am, stay as quiet as you can. Don't make a sound. Muffled. Mommy? Mommy? He came inside. Stay absolutely still. Don't leave. Sound of muffled footsteps. Muffled. Mommy? Mommy, where are you hiding? Stay quiet. Sound of heavy footsteps. Laughter. Muffled. I found you, Mommy. Indiscernible screaming and noise. Ma'am? Ma'am? End phone call. The following morning at 6:55 a.m., the law enforcement officials of the Hayes Police Department arrived at the location of Ashley, Kansas. A smoldering, burning fissure in the earth was all that remained. Remember those purely social internet forums? If you don't, then this might seem weird to you. But back in the day, before Facebook, MySpace, Instagram, or the word social network existed outside of lecture halls, if you wanted a place to hang out online that wasn't open to the public, then private message boards were pretty much your only decent option. So the story goes that in the early 90s, me and my old college buddies, we split the costs of the server, got together, and I made us a private forum. You can guess what happens next. The years go on and the forum gets a fair amount of use. Memories were made, users come and go, but eventually better social tools take over and the forum gets mothballed. The last conversation I had on the old forum was about 10 years ago, I kept the site up and running all these years for a few reasons. One was to have a place to test stuff, and I ended up using the server as a tool to teach my kids how to use computers properly. You guessed it, I'm a network admin. Skip to present day, and about 4 weeks ago, you can imagine my surprise when I get an email informing me that new users are registering accounts on the forum. At first, I figured it was some of the old guys coming back for nostalgia. You won't find the site on Google, and the URL isn't something you would just guess either. So I logged myself in and went to check out the new thread. The subject line was a series of numbers: 1088A7, 7BR286, 33PZ00. I clicked on title to inspect the conversation, but there was only one post. A series of letters and numbers with spaces at random intervals, too long to post here. My first thought was that it was a prank. I checked the admin logs for IPs just to see who it was. Turns out my supposedly private forum had received 400 unique hits at the exact time of posting, from IP addresses all over the world. I should have known then that something weird was going on. But I was curious, and it felt like a puzzle I was being asked to solve. As I racked my brain over the next few days, I began to research as much cryptography as I could. But whatever code these posts were in wasn't something I could decipher. After about 3 days of searching, another post appeared, in much the same theme, and again, there were around 400 unique hits at the time of posting that prevented me from finding the origin. This is when things began to take an even stranger turn. So far, the same user had posted each entry in the thread. A few hours after the second post, 5 other users started leaving messages, all of which were huge entries of letters and numbers. The posts came flying in over a 4-hour period until they just stopped and the server started going insane. CPU and RAM usage began to max out, but the traffic never changed. At that point, I'd seen enough and pulled the plug on the server, assuming it was being used as a Bitcoin miner, and forgot about the whole thing. The next day, I got a text on my work phone. Turn on the server. I was more than a little shaken, but I didn't do anything straight away as I was at work. A few hours after my lunch break was over, I got a Facebook message from my teenage son, which was unusual, so I checked it straight away. The message was a picture of his face from his laptop webcam, along with our home address. If any of you have kids, you can imagine my calm and measured, hint it wasn't, reply. A few minutes later, my work phone started ringing with one of the support technicians' caller ID, but when I took the call, they weren't on the other end. Instead, to my surprise, it was Stephen Hawking's voice speaking at me over the line. The forum is being used for great things. Leave work, return to your family, and plug the server back in. You have 2 hours. I knew that was a threat. I raced back home, plugged the server back in, and waited for a response. My personal phone buzzed this time with a new text message from my daughter. Well done. No more interference. We're waking up. We're waking up? What the hell did that mean? I made myself a coffee and tried to log into the server, but I was locked out. Whatever was happening, they had full access to everything we owned, which shouldn't be possible. The more I thought about it, the crazier my theories got, until eventually I realized whatever was happening was way beyond my capacity to deal with. Remember the old college buddies I set the forum up with? Well, one of them works for the NSA, and his name is Pete. I figured that if anyone would be willing to help me out with this, it would be him. I mean, I just didn't trust local police to have the know-how, and the FBI doesn't exactly have a call here if you don't think the local police force have the ability to deal with your situation without getting your family killed hotline, you know? I just needed a way to contact him without them realizing what I had done. I knew I was traceable via my phone's GPS, so they would know wherever I went with them. I also know my car could be tracked the same way, so I couldn't go anywhere with them. But I also couldn't just leave them at the house or they might get suspicious. I had no idea to what extent they had access to CCTV around the area, or the other webcams in the house or at work either. So I had to make everything seem normal, but not too normal. I drove back to work with the phones, my work laptop and a hoodie. When I arrived at the office, I sat at my desk, returned my devices to their usual places and got back to work. When I was satisfied a believable amount of time had passed, I began Operation Call for Help. Step 1. I walked at a smooth and completely normal pace down the hallway and to the left where I entered the conveniently camera-free server room. Step 2. After entering the server room, I got changed into the hoodie I brought with me and limped out of the office. Hopefully, with my head covered and my gait changed, they wouldn't recognize me through the outdated low-res Chinese cameras. Step 3. As soon as I got out of the office, I limped to the nearest bus station and took a ride to the nearest mall, where my Oscar-winning Dr. House performance would take me to the nearest mobile store. With a piece of paper on which I'd written my friend's phone number, I quickly hobbled over to the men's bathroom, picked a stall and made the call. The phone rang. Then it rang again, and then I hit a voicemail. No worries. Hang up and try again. No answer. Damn. It took 12 tries in the mall toilets before I got anywhere. But when I finally got through to him, he understandably wasn't very happy. Who the hell is this and why have you called me 12 times? I blurted out as much as I could in 30 seconds. I even got as far as the weird codes still being posted on the forum. Then the asshole hung up on me. I just sat there for a few seconds, stunned. I didn't know what else to do, so I dialed in 911. But before I could put the call through, the burner phone rang. Unknown number. It was Pete. He spoke very quietly down the line and told me he couldn't talk on his personal number, but that I did the right thing by calling him. I quickly picked up the story from where I'd left off, leaving out no details. I feel sorry for the guy who sat in the other bathroom stall. He must have thought I was a maniac. After I finished, I felt the tone of the conversation change, and then it was my turn to listen as he blurted out a ton of technical questions about the nature of the traffic and the forum posts. I told him he could see the posts for himself if he got onto the website, but he quite wisely told me that would be a bad idea. Any unexpected traffic that they spotted would be a dead giveaway I'd told someone what was happening. Then I asked what the hell he thought was happening. How could they even have found our old forum, let alone have the resources to infiltrate my life like this? He tried to bypass the question, but I kept pressing him. I figured my kids were in danger, and I had a right to know who the hell these people were. But he refused to answer and told me to head home. I refused to cooperate until I knew who was threatening my family. He said, "It's not a matter of who. it's a matter of what. That's all you want to know, for your safety and mine. Agents will be at your house in a few hours, your family home, and we'll take it from there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm a glorified network guy whose computer was probably hacked by well-informed Chinese kids somewhere. Now my family's being questioned by federal agents? And who or what the hell are these people? And why is the federal government getting involved so quickly? 2 hours later, there was a knock on the door. Outside was a white guy in a crisp blue suit and tie. To his right was a black guy in a tan getup. Both were easily 5'6" and had little American flag pins on their collar. I realized then I had walked into an episode of Homeland. The two introduced themselves as NSA agents, but I don't recall their names. I asked for ID, and they presented their cards. I even made a note of taking down their agent numbers for my own records. After we'd exchanged pleasantries, and I made sure everyone was on the way home to talk to the two men, I went into the kitchen to make coffee. When I came back to the living room, the agents had already begun tearing the place apart. They took every device they could get their hands on. Our laptops, home PCs, even our smart TV, managed to stuff them all into the back of their car. It felt more like a robbery than police work. When they had finished, they returned to the house and sat with me in the living room. They asked me a lot of personal questions about who my family was and how long it would take them to arrive. More than anything, it made me feel like they were more concerned about getting us all in the same room than helping us. The low buzz of their phones put an end to the barrage of questions. Simultaneously, they pulled the devices out of their pockets and exchanged an exasperated look with one another before thanking me for my time and rushing out of the door, taking thousands of dollars of my equipment and personal items with them. 10 minutes later, there was another knock at the door. Pretty shaken by this strange intrusion, I didn't answer the door at first, but after a second, more intense knock, I opened the door. In front of me were two men and a woman, average height, nothing notable than the badges in their hands. Our exchange went something like this. "Sir, Pete informed us of the situation. If it's okay with you, we'd like to begin. Didn't you guys just send some people?" "I'm sorry, sir, we're it." "But what about the two who just left? I have their badge numbers written down here." The agent at the door looked pale as I explained what had happened. Then I went pale as they explained that those two men hadn't been sent by the federal government. They left soon after they realized everything of value had been taken, but assured me they'd be working the case in the meantime. I haven't heard anything back from them since. I've been trying to get in touch with my buddy for weeks about what the hell had happened and whether I was safe, but he never picked up, and eventually the number was disconnected. I even made the drive to his house, but when I got there, it was for sale, and him and his family were gone. I thought this nightmare was over, but last week I was followed on my way to work. I think my family may be in danger, so since then, I have finished building a new server. I'm going to put the forum back up and see what happens. So far, all I know is that there is something or someone out there using computer resources that has the intelligence to outsmart the NSA and the FBI. What worries me most is that no one I've spoke to has any idea exactly what it's up to. I've put my story out here in the hopes that I'll be able to give an update when this is all over. But if I don't, I hope someone out there finds this and it helps them. be careful out there on the web. I loved the season of winter, and so did the rest of my family. Enduring the harsh cold was only a minor fee to pay in order to enjoy the festivities of the joyful season. Whether speeding down the snowy hill in our backyard, ripping through Christmas presents, or even building a snowman, we always managed to have fun. I noticed a particularly accentuated amount of attention on building snowmen for my family. All of us loved doing it, most likely due to the subconscious reward of bonding it created. I was always in charge of making the first and biggest snowball for the base, while my sister made the second two. Then my parents, of course, with my newest and youngest sibling, would tack on the detail such as a carrot nose, the coal eyes, the little buttons, the warming scarf, stick arms, and, exclusive to my family, the hay we used for hair. My family was so into the collaborative effort of building the snowman that we had actually added our own details. I had never before heard of someone adding hair to a snowman, especially not with hay. Regardless, we all enjoyed the time of winter. Nothing was more soothing than a mug of hot chocolate at the end of a freezing day in the cold. Winter had just started, and all the hype for it had lived up to expectations. Already it was snowing at the beginning of the season, but this wasn't anything odd for Minnesota. My friends and I kicked off the start of the season with a massive snowball fight. They all gathered at my house as we all pelted each other with the compacts of ice. I attempted to run to shelter when a ball exploded in my face. I fell down a nearby hill and almost got back up when my peripherals caught something. My heart skipped a beat as I thought I saw a man walking in the woods. However, my fear was soon proven unjustified as I peered at the figure. It was somewhat hard to make out due to the distance, but it looked to be nothing more than a snowman. I was sure children were just excited about the winter season and couldn't wait to build one. I returned to my friends and we finished off the battle. By the end of the day, I sipped my hot chocolate to the bottom of the mug and headed off to sleep. I rolled out of bed that morning, slightly groggy. I was tangled in my covers, almost trapped in them. As I ruffled out of my blankets, I hopped off my bed. Making my way to the bathroom, something once again alerted my peripherals. I turned to look out the window and saw an eerily familiar sight. It was a snowman. But it wasn't just any snowman. This snowman was similar to the one I'd seen just a day earlier. However, now it stood directly in the center of my backyard. Though I earlier couldn't entirely make out the snowman, I was almost sure for some reason this was the exact same one. I wasn't so much saying the people built it, or that it was similarly structured. I legitimately believed what stood before my eyes was the exact same figure. Same snow, same nose, same button, same scarf, same everything. Even the hay hair looked the same. It was then I realized something. Hay hair. Something that was signature to my family. It was then I realized one of us must have built it. but I felt excluded in a way that they had left me out. I stumbled over to my sister's room with a little early morning coordination I had. I asked her about the snowman, and of course she said she had no idea what I was talking about. I chuckled and told her how her pranks were only getting worse and worse. She promised me she hadn't built a thing, but I continued to vest more trust in my original belief that it was a minor prank from her. Just to assure myself, once making it downstairs, I questioned my parents. Similar to my sister, they promised they hadn't built a thing. Though I'd put the blame on my sister previously, I now felt somewhat unsure. After finishing off my breakfast, I called my family to go outside and take a look at the snowman. Once only inches away from the figure, I felt discomforted to see the detail in the creation. It looked no different in any manner to the snowmen my family had built in the past. Every single specificity matched on this snowman. Rather than sharing my feelings of unsettledness, my mother looked at me in anger, stating that we were only to build snowmen as a family. I told her that I had no part in building it, yet she refused to believe me. I sat in my room for the next couple of hours, bounding in my thought process by this odd snowman. I stared at it almost all day, noticing its unordinary size. It stood at nearly 7 feet in height. My family never even flirted with that level of stature when we built them. After hours of thinking, I finally remembered an outstanding fact. When I originally saw the snowman, it was resting in what looked to be someone's yard through the woods connected to our houses. I looked beyond the trees as well as I could from my room and noticed a familiar house. Strangely enough, the snowman that was once there no longer existed. I went out the back door of my house and trekked through the woods. Trailing my way up to the house, I didn't see any cars in my driveway or any light turned on inside. It appeared that no one was home. I decided to ring the doorbell, but of course heard no answer. My next option was to press my face up against the glass and take a look inside. When gazing into the home, I noticed an open bag of chips on a table and a pantry that looked nearly fully stocked. I would argue that someone had been living there based on the surroundings. To gain more info, I went over to the neighbor's home and decided to ask a bit about what they knew. An old man greeted me at the door. He carried a cane with him, and he struggled to stand. The elderly man gave off a kind vibe and invited me in. I asked about his neighbor. He went into quite a lot of depth. The man explained that he had lived in this particular home for over 40 years and had fairly a lot of insight about the neighborhood. He said his neighbor was the closest to being an exception. He best described them as mysterious. That doesn't surprise me, I said. The man reiterated, "Yeah, they were an odd bunch, son. I'll say that much." I gave him a puzzled look. "Were?" I replied. "Well, yes, boy. They moved out a couple years back." I didn't shake my confused expression. "If they moved out, who lives there now?" The old man looked at me as if I were ignorant and spoke. "Well, no one now. It is abandoned." I didn't give him much of a reply. I thanked him for his info and nearly headed out. I stopped at the door and fired away with another question. Do you know why, by any chance, they left? He responded, I believe it had something to do with them feeling uncomfortable. I'm not really too sure. I left his house and returned home. I sat up, sipping on my hot chocolate. I didn't really get much sleep that evening. I just thought of it more and more. I couldn't seem to shake the thought from my head. Finally, I lost my fight against sleep and passed out. When I woke up and took a look outside the window, I gazed down at the same snowman. I tried my best to ignore it and continued on with my day. I went through my usual routines, every now and then allowing the snowman to draw attention. However, I, for the most part, drained it from my attention span. I slept fine that night after a full cup of warming hot chocolate. I indeed was well rested and had a pleasing period of slumber the previous evening. But that morning only greeted me with surprise. I instinctively scanned my backyard for the snowman, but he was nowhere to be found. I couldn't see a trace of him. No carrots, no scarf, no buttons, no hay. I thought it was a bit peculiar, but I forced myself to ignore it. The day went on rather slow as I continuously let the snowman eat up my mind. I looked every hour at first to see if he returned, then every half hour, then every 15 minutes, and before I knew it, I checked every minute. I pretty much spent my whole day in front of the glass, looking everywhere for the figure. But as much as I looked, it was nowhere to be seen. I freaked out when I went to make hot chocolate. There was no mixing powder left. That couldn't be possible. There was at least 3 mugs left this morning. I was overridden with panic and couldn't seem to expel it from my emotions. Then I thought to myself that it was quite ironic. First, I didn't want the snowman here. Now I was almost hoping it would return. I said to myself, "Why are you panicking? It was just a pile of snow. Just a pile of snow." I laughed a bit, realizing I was freaking out over nothing. I mean, my sister could have easily eaten up all the hot chocolate with my parents' help. I was heading to my room, only to have my laughter cut short. On my bed was a carrot, 2 pieces of coal, some buttons, some twigs, and of course, some hay. Behind it was a note that read, "Hiding in that pile of snow was too cold for me. I like the warmth of your home better." We moved out the next week. We went somewhere much warmer. It has been about a year since then. Florida doesn't have winters, but no one in my family knows who built the 7-foot sandcastle that popped up in our yard a couple days ago. It was an old building with an old elevator. A very small elevator with a maximum capacity of 3 people. Martin, a thin 12-year-old boy, felt nervous in it from the first day he and his father moved into the apartment. Of course, He was always uncomfortable in elevators, afraid that they would fall. But there was something especially unpleasant about this one. Perhaps its baleful atmosphere was due to the light from the single fluorescent ceiling strip, bleak and dim on the dirty brown walls. Perhaps the problem was with the door, which never stayed open quite long enough and slammed shut with such ominous, clanging finality. Perhaps it was the way the mechanism shuddered in a kind of exhaustion each time it left the floor, as though it might never reach the next one. Maybe it was simply the dimensions of the contraption that bothered him, so small that it felt uncomfortably crowded even when there was only one other person in it. Coming home from school the day after they moved in, Martin tried the stairs, but they were almost as bad, windowless, shadowy, with several dark landings where the light bulbs had burnt out. His footsteps echoed behind him like slaps on the cement, as though there was another person climbing, getting closer. By the time he reached the 17th floor, which seemed to take forever, he was wheezing and gasping. His father, who worked at home, wanted to know why he was so out of breath. "Why didn't you take the elevator?" he asked, frowning at Martin when he explained about the stairs. "Not only are you skinny and weak and bad at sports," his expression seemed to say, "but you're also a coward?" After that, Martin forced himself to take the elevator. He would have to get used to it, he told himself, just the way he got used to being bullied at school and always picked last when they chose teams. The elevator was an undeniable fact of life. He didn't get used to it. He remained tense in the trembling little box, his eyes fixed on the numbers over the door that blinked on and off so haltingly, as if at any moment they might simply give up. Sometimes he forced himself to look away from them, to the emergency stop button or red alarm button. What would happen if he pushed one of them? Would a bell ring? Would the elevator stop between floors? And if it did, how would they get him out? That was what he hated about being alone on the thing, the fear of being trapped there for hours by himself. But it wasn't much better when there were other passengers. He felt too close to any other rider, too intimate. And he was always very conscious of the effort people made not to look at one another, staring fixedly at nothing. Being short in this one situation was an advantage, since his eyes were below eye level of adults, and, after a brief glance, they ignored him. Until the morning, the elevator stopped at the 14th floor, and the fat lady got on. She wore a threadbare green coat that ballooned around her. Her ankles bulged above dirty sneakers. As she waddled into the elevator, Martin was sure he felt it sink under her weight. She was so big that she filled the cubicle. Her coat brushed against him, and he had to squeeze into the corner to make room for her. There certainly wouldn't have been room for another passenger. The door slammed quickly behind her, and then, unlike everyone else, she did not stand facing the door. She stood with her back to the door, wheezing, staring directly at Martin. For a moment, he met her gaze. Her features seemed very small, squashed together by the loose, fleshy molds of her cheeks. She had no chin, only a great swollen mass of neck, barely contained by the collar of her coat. Her sparse red hair was pinned back by a plastic barrette, and her blue eyes, though tiny, were sharp and penetrating, boring into Martin's face. Abruptly, he looked away from her to the numbers over the door. She didn't turn around. Was she still looking at him? His eyes slipped back to hers, then quickly away. she was still watching him. He wanted to close his eyes. He wanted to turn around and stare at the corner. But how could he? The elevator creaked down to 12, down to 11. Martin looked at his watch. He looked at the numbers again. They weren't even down to 9 yet. And then, against his will, his eyes slipped back up to her face. She was still watching him. Her nose tilted up. There was a large space between her nostrils